Hello and welcome to a, special episode of How Money Really Works. As usual, I'm Peter Oliver, but for 1 week, and let's hope it's 1 week only, we're not joined by Stephen Hope. He's feeling a bit poorly right now, but stepping into his shoes to talk about one of those topics that we've gone through on the show before that really engaged quite a lot of you, the listeners and viewers. We're going to be talking about venues, music venues this time around, but it's about the VAT that went on them, the challenges facing those wanting to establish live music spots in and around the country, and what it means for touring musicians right now. We'll talk more about that. I'm joined by Frankie Francis, touring musician of his own, in his own accord at one point. Frankie, thanks very much for talking to us.
That's all right. I got a text off Stephen saying he was on his deathbed, and then he didn't reply for about 30 minutes. So I was like, is this goodbye?
I'm glad he did that to you as well, because while I've been trying to sort out what we were going to do, I got the same ones. I've tried to call him multiple times. Literally just texted me as we're about to go on. So don't worry, everybody.
Yeah.
He's still with us.
Still with us.
Just a little under the weather. Frankie. We'll talk a little bit about you. You've been a touring musician, venue operator. You're now trying to build a real ecosystem of musicians in Sunderland, where we're speaking to you from, just to let you in a little behind the curtain. If you hadn't guessed already, both me and Stephen are from the great city of Sunderland. That's where we are right now. When people talk about the live music sector, though, what does it actually look like on the ground right now?
Well, you've got to take it all into account, I think, and look at the industry as a whole. I think it's an industry of extremes, to be honest, and not much in the middle. So you have amazing exports going on. The UK leading the way globally with music exports, and the region actually doing quite well in that as well. But it's got a real crisis at the moment. It's got real dilemmas in both its business model and its grassroots kind of feeder level as well. And you kind of you can't have it all without the mechanisms in place throughout the progression routes. And there's some real stark gaps right there where some pretty established acts are simply not full time. And we're living in an industry essentially, Peter, where if this was a sausage factory and everyone stopped buying sausages, the sausage factory would pretty much go out of business the next day. Yet we are still operating because there is revenue streams every now and again. So for a musician, you can get paid quite well if you get to a decent level from festivals, for example. You can get paid quite well if your music is synced successfully, on an advert or something like that. The days of the big advanced record deal, it's kind of gone now, and it's the same for publishing deals as well. So it's in turmoil. And if anyone says they know which way it's going, they're lying. The big guys are completely as clueless as the people on the grassroots level, and everyone's second guessing the next move. The one thing that shines through is good ethos, integrity in your music, the right kind of DIY approach that still shines through and makes things happen on a kind of cultural city level. And of course, grassroots music venues play a huge part in that as well.
Now, before we move on to the political decisions that have impacted musicians and venues directly, things like the VAT increases and Brexit, of course, what does it take for a live music venue, let's say right here in the city of Sunderland, to be able to function month to month? What is the big challenges that they're facing when what number do they have to have coming through the tills, or what amount do they have to see coming through the tills to make that a viable business?
It's all to do with overheads and things like that, and the amount of gigs you put on. But there's a crisis going on there. Just to pull one of the stats out for you, Peter. In 1994, the average tour was 22 dates long. In 2024, that average tour has gone down to 11 dates, right? So that means that artists are touring less. Now, there's lots of reasons why that's happening. Cost of being on the road, cost of fuel, cost of van hire, cost of hotels. the ability to play in appropriate sized venues, but it has a huge knock-on effect to the amount of live music that a music venue can put on. If no one's out, if no one's willing to play, then you've got to be multi-purpose as a space or place, and that's something that a lot of music venues are doing right now. And they're also trying to get away from, well, not out of tax loopholes, but they're trying to get around, they're trying to survive the best way they can. And they're finding themselves as having to set up more and more as non-profit organizations, not for profit, so CRCs and things like that, because of the things they'll do within it. You know, your grassroots music venue doesn't just put on rock bands on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It might have a knitting group on a Tuesday morning, a spoken word group on a Wednesday, a toddler group on a Thursday, coffee morning on a Friday, that kind of thing. It's the way they have to try and survive. We set up, my band Frankie and The Heartstrings, we set up a music venue as a record shop. And we very quickly realized that we were selling more coffee and tea than we were records, which is incredibly sad because we're quite
It
romantic.
really is,
We're
but
quite romantic about, records and the music industry as well. And our band released everything on vinyl and still try and do that, and I myself have a huge record collection, and as do many people.
Yep.
But you just got to find what works in your area and kind of go with it. And essentially the model that Pop Rex became, which is the venue in Sunderland, that is essentially a cafe day to day. And maybe there will be 2 gigs a week, but there might also be a live drawing class and a poetry class as well. So yeah, there's lots of barriers. There's lots of ways around it as well. But essentially the main things are business rates, which depending on what you do as a venue, there's ways and means and different rates available. There's staffing, obviously. Energy bills never been higher. I guess that's the big one. But we have seen successfully in other music venues, so there's a couple in our city where they've done things like use the most of solar power initiatives and things like that, which help reduce the cost and enable them to keep the costs down. But, produce has never been more expensive. Beer's never been more expensive. So yeah, there's lots of costs involved in opening a music venue. Licenses as well, of course, PRS and things like that. So
the VAT situation won't have helped matters. We've seen that it is driving. They were talking about some 2,000 venues, music venues, or venues in general, that they expected to close this year alone. Why is that such a kick in the teeth for people trying to run businesses that, if you said, they're already getting hammered on the costs that they're going to have to pay to hire staff, the energy bills and everything else that you said? Why was this VAT thing that came through such a kick in the teeth?
Well, it just feels like, you're in it for the cultural significance and the love of it. So it feels like such a kick in the teeth as we're doing this for the greater good of our local communities and ultimately to the UK Expo office, because these places are breeding grounds for success. But not only that, they're places where people make friends for life. They're places where people may only speak to another person in their week, So that's why it feels like a real kick in the teeth, We're trying to create culture and encourage culture. And it's almost like not being able or afforded to do so.
I mean, ultimately as well, are you going to have to, because you want to get people to come, the more people that come and watch live music, the more people that visit these venues. Obviously, it's not just great to have people coming through the door, but it gets the next round of people interested in it and involved in it. Do you run the risk, though, of having to do things like raise the prices and ultimately price people who might have thought, I'll come along, price them out?
Yes, and that's something that we're always conscious of. As I've got this role as a music officer for Sunderland Music City, and something I'd love to advocate towards more of is accessibility and poverty proofing and things like that, because everyone should be afforded the opportunity of seeing live music, because that could change someone's life. It might just be the spark they need. They might see a performance or an instrument that they've never seen before and think, I wouldn't mind having to go at that, and that sets them off on a course of life. It's essentially that happened to me, as a college, that when the Future Heads took off, and I was really into my music, but I never really thought that a band from the city where I was from could actually go on to achieve amazing things. And when I saw it with my own eyes, and I saw them from playing in a room full of 100 people to being on Top of the Pops in Jules Holland within the space of like a year from that point of seeing them in that room, I was like, this is possible. And it set me on a trajectory, you know? So it's life changing, and everyone should be afforded that opportunity. So it's important we work with schools and education and youth groups and things like that, just to show people progression routes within music.
That's great, though. That representation, I mean, it's great that it happened to you. It's terribly sad that it may run the risk of other people, but that representation of seeing a band from, because I'm a bit older than you, Frankie, I was well out of college by the time the Future Heads came on the scene. But yeah, being able to see a band from your area,
Yep.
which we're not an area that gets overly represented, I would have thought, on national media, but to see them doing what they were doing, that gives you the impetus. It's sad that that's going to not be there for future generations in some senses if if venues close
Yeah.
and or people are priced out of there. You talked about the impact of the VAT rise. The government did step in and say they were going to provide some help. Speaking to the venue owners, and as a venue operator yourself, what's the feeling now?
Well, I just think that, you know, when I speak to other venue owners as well, and we took part in Independent Venue Week this week with a venue in Sunderland actually called Independent as well, and you know, this is the hardest part of the year, really. You know, that the first month, and there's no coincidence why Independent Venue Week is stuck into January to try and raise the awareness of these spaces and places, and it's never been harder. You know, one grassroots music venue in the UK closes every 2 weeks, and the Music Venues Trust has just released their report for the previous year. Get this one. So 43.8% of all music venues reported losses within the last 12 months, right? So that's nearly half of all music venues reported losses. If these were to all just go, and they are labours of love, like the people who are behind Independent and so on, they've just done it for 20 years. It's celebrating its 20th year, which is such an achievement in itself. The fact it's still here and operating, that alone is amazing. It's become a habit for these people. It's a habit getting up every day, see who they can get on, running the club nights, whatever, just surviving. If all these places were to go, the industry is facing a real pipeline crisis, you know? If we were to use football analogies, and
Let's do that.
you know, I think the FA and the Premier League about 25 years ago, it was kind of post Euro 96, I think. They really took it seriously looking at grassroots football pitches and things like that, didn't they? So they started trickling down the TV money through the leagues. Ultimately, that went into community chests and things like that. And, you know, when we first started playing football, we were playing on fields of dog poo and sand, whatever.
Yeah.
But now 3G pitches are kind of expected and things like that. If we don't look after the grassroots of the music industry in the same kind of way from the top down, we're going to be faced with, not very good talent at the top, or the same faces for the next 30 years as well. And people like nostalgia, that's fine, but you need to keep on pushing the boundaries with art, and you're not going to have that pipeline unless you look after the grassroots. And Music Venues Trust and an organisation called the Live Trust have done amazing work to try and campaign for a levy, which is not legislation yet, it's kind of discretion from artists. But last year, at the beginning of this year, so we saw the first returns of that. So that was artists kind of saying, okay, I don't mind giving £1 off our tickets to this Live Trust. And that actually raised over £500,000, which will then be distributed by Live to grassroots music venues. That is not legislation. It would be great if there was a levy on that. So I think the campaign is anything over 5,000 capacity, £1 will automatically be taken from each ticket and put into this pot and then distributed annually. That would be amazing, but we are not there with legislation.
Well, that brings me perfectly, almost like you planned that, Frankie, onto my next question, which is, what has the reaction been to the reaction from venues, from politicians? Like, what has the reaction been from the politicians to the reaction from venues that this is these prices have gone up so much? Are you hearing anything? Because I spend a lot of time with politicians,
Mm.
asking them questions. One of the big questions you have to be very careful about asking them, especially if their press people are around, is about anything to do with culture or music, because
Yeah.
they're very reluctant to say, oh, I like X band or Y band or X artist. Do you feel listened to by the politicians? Because they're very keen when musicians in Britain are successful to have them wheeled out and
Yeah.
stand alongside them. But those people don't get to be there unless they've come up through the grassroots. Do you feel like there's anybody listening to you, or do you feel like they've just gone, look, we're helping you out here, get on with it?
Yeah, I think there is people who genuinely care, and I think maybe it was Chris Bryant spoke of going to actually a stadium show in Sunderland as well, and he understands, what the music industry is facing, and he understands the ask of this levy as well. I think you can only look towards your local MP, and our local MP Lewis Atkinson is actually on a music committee board as well within DCMS as well. So I do feel listened to, but it's just a systemic issue within the industry as well, and the industry's got to help itself as well and recognize that, you know, they could. There's no reason why the big labels couldn't implement this as a kind of initiative to all their high rollers, and a lot of them get it, So like the likes of Coldplay and Sam Fender did this, and Pulp and similar artists. But if it was just like a given that you got to look after the grassroots, because essentially they are going to benefit from this as well, the big guys, because they want to sign new and exciting artists. We don't want this industry to become elitist, which it has been for a long time. And over the last 10 years, there's quite a lot of bands who are not afforded the full-time opportunity through their cultural or social circumstance. Whereas if you're from a well-to-do background, you might be afforded that opportunity to take your music full-time because of the bank of mom and dad. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're in that position and you can let your kids do that, that's great. But that's not the norm, really, let's be honest.
It's not the conveyor belt that you were talking about.
It's not my norm.
Young person
Yeah.
goes to music venue, sees live music, thinks, I wouldn't mind to go at that.
Yeah.
That's not how that works. Just to play devil's advocate for a bit and go back to the government side, they're going to point to the fact that the country's broke.
Yeah.
They're going to point to the fact that there's already grants, there's relief schemes, there's funding available that is out there. But from your side, a lived experience of seeing all this, is it enough? Does it go to the right areas? And how could they target that better?
There's definitely not enough support, remember during COVID when Rishi Sunak told us all to, hey, maybe there's jobs in cyber or something like that. I think it was, I can't even work with microwave, never mind code, So, this sector, the grassroots music sector actually contributed £526 million worth of contributions towards the economy. But that's making real difference to city nighttime economies, so you don't just go to a gig, you go somewhere for dinner before perhaps, or you definitely go for a pint afterwards if it's a Friday or Saturday night. There's real arguments here of how music is the lifeblood of the city's nighttime culture. And if you want people on the high street and no one's going to shops because there's no shops on the high street, well, at least try and get them there on the nighttime. There's loads of contributing factors up here. It's like we've got to try and campaign for later buses, because if you can't get a bus home, you're not going to go to the gig in the first place, and things like that.
From Hetton, I mean, I
Yeah.
know this goes out all over the place, but just to put that into context, about 11, 12 kilometres away from the city centre, there's no bus after a certain time. As a kid, I certainly wasn't going to be able to get back.
Yeah, and it's the same for the metro as well, which is like, the kind of like local train transport operator. There's got to be kind of two-way traffic on there with incentives. So there's incentives to go one way on the metro, but not the other way as well. So yeah, there's loads of things to weigh up. If you can't get to and from the city centre at night, look, there's lots of issues with the sector. But what there's lots of people working really hard for the love of it. And those people are still affording others careers and opportunities. And to not be too philosophical, like make reality quite tangible dreams. So if you got a dream of running your own club night, you can walk into one of these places and set it up for next week. If you got a dream of putting your own gig on, you've been working hard in your garage with your mates for the last 6 7 months and you want to do a gig, you can walk into these places and ask to put a gig on, and keep the money from the door once they've paid for the sound guy. Things like that. The real places of opportunity.
And that's crucial towards the development of this culture that Britain has built part of its whole national identity.
But isn't that entrepreneurship as well?
Well, it is, exactly. And isn't that what you're supposed to be aiming for?
Yeah.
What we're told that we have to aim for in this country right now. But Sunderland has been trying, as a city, not just Sunderland, but many others as well, but Sunderland's been trying to establish itself or rebuilding its identity through music. How fragile is what I have to say? I don't live in Sunderland anymore. Just I actually don't live in the UK anymore. I live in Berlin these days, but I'm family here. I'm backwards and forwards, and I do notice massive changes in this city, and a lot of it's driven by either football or culture.
Yeah.
And how fragile is the progress in establishing that rebranding, and what potentially could we lose if help isn't there and venues have to keep trying to squeeze between those margins?
Yeah, well, what we saw was an opportunity with Sunderland Music City to give Sunderland a new label, a new identity. We have got quite a really rich heritage of significant music things have happened in Sunderland over centuries, right? So the first place of documented melody being chanted was by Venerable Bede's monks in St. Peter's Church in Sunderland.
I did not expect that. And, I expected many great things from speaking to you today, Frankie. I did not expect to hear. Go on. So the first
recorded melody of so someone basically Bede brought like the Cliff Richard of the day from the Vatican to St. Peter's Church, which is one of the oldest churches in the UK, right? Got them to the monks to chant in choral melody. And someone recorded that, like not on a record player.
Music notation.
So someone wrote down, like, they chanted this, and it kind of went a bit like da 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 da. That's recorded. That's one of the earliest recorded markers of music happening anywhere in the world, kind of thing. And right up to like the guy who wrote Little Donkey was from Sunderland.
Never in a million years.
Yeah, an insanely influential punk scene in the 70s. Acid house creators through the 90s, Britpop bands, international trap. It's not just the fun people on stage as well. It's like people who run logistic companies and production companies and power companies and tour managers and world-renowned sound guys and producers and editors and all sorts of people are from Sunderland, and you can find it all on our website, musiccity.uk, and there's a really rich heritage there. So what we found, Peter, was an opportunity to celebrate that and afford people the opportunity to celebrate these things and give people an aspirational chance of looking seriously at the sector, seeing what's on the doorstep and thinking, I'm going to choose music as a career. And it's not necessarily just on stage, it's careers based around it. And careers while you're doing stuff on stage. That's the kind of modern approach of being a musician. That's why I'm here speaking to you on a podcast about finance, because I've got advocate through Sunderland Music City. Technically I've still got a record deal, but I'm also doing bits of stuff around other culture stuff in, multimedia stuff. So we looked at it, and the people behind Sunderland Music City said, right, we failed to get City of Culture in 2021, I think it was, 2019. We're going to go for being a music city officially. So we spoke to the Music Cities Network. We asked them what their criteria was. We said, well, we already meet all of this criteria. Our ethics align. We've got real ambition. We want to celebrate people and support people. So we'll write a strategy. So we wrote a strategy. It was completely informed by the public of Sunderland and also the music sector themselves. That totally informed the strategy. We wrote that over the next 5 years. We'll try and deliver this strategy. We're 18 months in. We applied to be a member of the Music Cities Network, of which Berlin is one, and Sydney, they were a founder member, predominantly European cities within our Music Cities Network. But we're in a situation now, Peter, where people are using our music strategy, like Valencia, as the exemplar for music strategy in a major city, and we're totally involved with them. And now we shout that Sunderland is a music city, and why not have a label like that on this city? What else is our label? Well, we've got a proud post-industrial history. but we can't really shout about the pits because they're not here anymore. Very proud of that and all the traditions that went with it. Shipyards have gone. Extremely proud of that. It kind of put us on the map globally, biggest shipbuilding town in the world at some point. That's not here anymore at all. So what is our identity? We're a city by a sea, but not everyone knows that. Seemingly we've had some kind of crisis PR problem for the last 300, 400 years when no one actually knows we've got a beach. So that's not, we need something else. So why not?
Not only a beach, some of the finest beaches that you will ever see in the world. Please do come and visit them. They are brilliant. Just not all
Yeah.
of you, because they're quite nice sometimes
Yeah.
when it's nice to walk around them alone. But yeah, music obviously a big part of that identity. But you're trying to get sorted there. When you do come over to Berlin, because I'm presuming there are exchanges between those, we will have to do another episode from that side then. For round 2, exactly. There must be an optimism about the Music City part of it, about getting people involved in grassroots music. But then you come back to all of those stumbling points that come from politics. Now, in order to be a music city and travel around Europe, you've got to travel to Europe. And bands that want to gig, and I'm going back 30 years nearly here from some bands that I was friendly with when I was in school and university times and 20 odd years ago. And they would all go and tour Europe whenever they could, from being very small, and it really taught them their trade. It ended quite a few bands that probably shouldn't have been together, because you had to sit in the van for a long time driving around from Köln to, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of Austria overnight. They're not getting that chance at the moment, or at least it's not as easy to do that at the moment. How much, 10 years on, has Brexit still a problem for the music industry?
It's a huge barrier. That is fact. It's a huge barrier. It's never been more expensive to be on the road as well. So living in a city like Sunderland, you'd always have to travel, and quite often you go to London quite a lot, and getting that van on the road has never been more expensive. So there's initial outlay for the van hire. Fuel is another massive one, and then you look at permits and work visas and all that kind of thing to take it elsewhere. When we first started touring, Europe was accessible, really accessible, and we went there a lot, extensively to places like Germany and the Netherlands and France, Belgium, pretty much all of Europe we did in the van, so it wasn't like a flight thing. And you mentioned like spending hours and hours and hours in a van, it makes or breaks you, but actually like you form bonds which are like unbreakable. You become like a family almost. The real special moments, and I really, really feel sorry for the bands now who are touring and won't get over to Europe as easily as we did, initially, because of the barriers that are in place, the paperwork, to do things all above board, and everyone wants to do things above board,
Exactly.
You can fly in a little easier if you're hiring gear on the other side, so there's less paperwork and that kind of thing, and
But that's extra costs.
of course it's extra cost and not as reliable sometimes. Flight can be cancelled and you don't make that gig, and you lose all your money. So yeah, it's really hard. It's such a shame that it's such a barrier, to get over there. But I understand there is people working hard to try and wiggle it a bit, to make it easier, because the big guys are affected as much as the little guys when it comes to this, and they understand the barriers, but they can afford to, with the processes, they've afforded the opportunity to do that. Whereas, 3 people in the car probably can't, so it's difficult.
2 final questions. I promise I'll let you go, because you've done me a massive favour coming in here at short notice. If you had the decision makers from UK politics in front of you for 5 minutes, what are 3 things that they could do that are within their gift to do, that wouldn't require huge amounts of legislation being upturned, that would make a massive and immediate difference to venues, to into the music industry, the grassroots music industry in general? So what are the big stumbling blocks that are there?
Well, for venues, it's rates, isn't it, and things like that. So I would ask them to be lenient with rates and give them an opportunity to get people into the city centres, to get people moving and spending the money in the nighttime economies. They'll see a real benefit of that if they do that with venues. Um, I think we'll get there with the legislation on the levy for the £1 on prices of tickets over 5,000 capacity. I think we'll get there on that. So it's just a case of sticking that in the back of the net and getting that over the line. And when it comes to working with our partners in Europe, you know, let's just see what is the ambition here. It's to create music, it's to create experience and let our culture go to other cultures. And I'm much more rounded person for touring the world several times, and how can you not afford people that opportunity, and to try and ease those hurdles as well, and you know uh, work with Europe more.
Frankie, from talking to you, and I'm sure everybody else watching and listening will tell as well, there's a great enthusiasm for music and for the music industry from the grassroots coming from you. What is it that gives you optimism? Why do you put so much effort in to fighting? You must see something that's there, but fighting for grassroots music in Sunderland.
Because I'm very proud of the city where I live, and I want it to be as good as it can be. And we're at a point now where the city is changing physically. We've had 30 years of no real investment in the city centre, for example, and it's physically changing around our feet. There's buildings popping up left, right, and centre. There's bridges being made, and maybe that's like, symbolic of like maybe the connections we're making in culture as well. So why can't the culture change? To give you a good milestone, 20 years ago, well, 21 years ago, Radio 1, the big UK radio broadcaster, they brought One Big Weekend to Sunderland. When they did that, there was no designated music venue in Sunderland, apart from the Sunderland Empire, which is a theatre, right?
Yeah.
There was a small room above a pub on Park Lane called the Voodoo Rooms. But I remember before that, it would be upstairs at the Royalty or the function suite at Ashbury Cricket Club, which we put bands on. Now we are in a position where Radio 1's Big Weekend is coming back to Sunderland. And they didn't intend this, but it accidentally left a legacy where now there are several purpose-built music venues. We have a really strong city centre cafe culture, which hadn't been there for 30 years. I understand we had quite a big cafe culture in the 50s, and we even had a kind of passive jazz scene between Durham and Sunderland in the 50s, which was really interesting, which I'm just getting a hold of. So I need to do some more research on
That's
this.
definitely the next podcast.
Yeah.
But 50s jazz between, where was it? Between Sunderland and Durham.
Yeah.
Great, we'll have some of that.
And we're now in a situation where you can, this sounds mental, but for 30 years you couldn't get a coffee after 3 p.m. and stuff like that. But now, the city's changing physically, culturally. Let's find some new identities within it. The football club are doing really well for the first time in decades, probably. Yeah. And let's use that as our amplifier to tell everyone what's happening to Sunderland in the world. People hadn't heard of Sunderland before Sunderland Till I Die and things like that. So that brought an international audience. Let's use all these things as much as we can to shine a light on the good things that are happening here and create an identity for ourselves. Geographically, we are the central city in the northeast region. We should be the center of everything.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Frankie, thanks so much. Frankie Francis, musician, venue operator, and the ambassador, the music, what was your?
Music officer.
The music officer.
That
gives you like a rank, doesn't it? I like that. Sunderland Music Officer at
Yeah.
Sunderland Music City. How can anybody who's interested in what you said get in touch with you? How can they help to contribute if they want to? How can anybody who wants to get in touch with you, what should they do?
Just get in touch with me on socials. I'm quite prominent on there. Or if you want to get in touch from a Music City point of view, go on our website, musiccity.uk.
I will make sure that is in the show notes. Frankie Francis, thank you very much for talking to us. That was our show this week. No Stephen, as we mentioned at the top. He will be back at some point. I believe next week's show, I'll be coming to you live from China. So there we go. We get about a bit more every week. thank you very much for listening, for watching. Do follow us on all of the social media that we have as well. That'll also be in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with us to suggest a topic that Stephen can look at in a bit more detail when he comes back from his little sojourn being sick, then of course there we will answer all of those questions like we always do. If you get in touch with us on social media, the links are in the show notes from wherever you're watching. Thank you very much. I'll speak to you next week.